A single human sneeze contains up to 40,000 droplets. For the Thalaxian boarding party, it contained 40,000 weapons. Admiral Kale watched through the viewport as a routine capture turned to frozen horror. His elite warriors, masters of galactic combat, began to fall, not to plasma fire or blades, but to something they had never evolved to fear, an airborne microbe. In 60 seconds, the entire mission was wiped out by a biological accident. The Thalaxian Concorde was the galaxy's premier military power. Their soldiers were genetically engineered to resist every known toxin and pathogen. Their mission to capture the human science vessel *Pandora was considered a routine exercise, which means their total failure presents a singular, terrifying question: what exactly are we carrying inside us? To understand the scale of their miscalculation, you must first understand the Thalaxian Concorde. For 8 centuries, they ruled through a doctrine of absolute biological control. Their civilization was engineered, quite literally, from the DNA up. On their homeworld, Thalax Prime, every microbe, every virus, every potential pathogen had been mapped, catalogued, and neutralized over 1,000 years ago. Their greatest achievement was not their starships or their plasma cannons, but their immune systems. A Thalaxian warrior could drink raw sewage from 100 worlds and suffer nothing worse than a mild stomach ache. They had conquered plague, rendered their bodies inert to infection. This was the foundation of their arrogance, and it was this arrogance that made the human discovery so inconvenient. Humanity's entry into the galactic community was, by all accounts, an accident. The *Pandora was not a warship. It was a deep-range astrobiological survey vessel, its mission peaceful and academic, to catalogue extremophile bacteria on tidally locked moons in the Zeta Reticuli fringe. Its crew of 47 were scientists, doctors, and xenobotanists. Their most powerful weapon was a microscope. When their long-range scanner pinged with an unidentified energy signature, they diverted course, driven by simple curiosity. The signature was a Thalaxian deep space monitoring buoy, cloaked and silent. By the time Pandora's sensors resolved what it was too late. They had trespassed into a classified military annex zone, a violation punishable under Concorde law by immediate impoundment and memory wipe of the crew. The Concorde's response was swift and clinical. Admiral Kale, commander of the 3rd Border Fleet, received the alert. To him, it was a triviality, another species of soft, fragile organics blundering into a restricted zone. Standard procedure was the dispatch of a boarding claw, a specialized craft carrying a hand of warriors. A hand consisted of 5 soldiers. It was considered more than sufficient for any non-Thalaxian vessel. The warriors of a hand were not just soldiers, they were walking biosafety labs. Their sealed armor included real-time atmospheric scrubbers, nanofilters capable of trapping particles as small as 0.01 microns, and subcutaneous injectors packed with broad-spectrum antiviral and antibacterial cocktails. Their very presence was meant to sterilize a space. They weren't just there to capture a ship, they were there to sanitize it. Meanwhile, aboard the *Pandora, the mood was one of panicked professionalism. Captain Aris Thorne, a veteran of 2 decades in the void, understood the gravity of their era. He'd heard stories of the Concorde. Their reputation for ruthless efficiency was galactic legend. He ordered a full containment protocol. The crew sealed themselves in the central life support hub. Environmental systems were locked to internal circulation. It was a standard biocontainment procedure, designed to prevent the exchange of any potential contaminants with a boarding party. A courtesy and a safety measure ingrained in human spacefaring protocol for centuries, but every protocol is built on assumptions. Human biocontainment assumes the other party is *vulnerable* to contamination. The Thalaxians operated on the opposite assumption, that they were invulnerable. This fundamental disconnect created the kill box. Let's talk about the human body as an ecosystem. You are not an individual, you are a metropolis, 100 trillion human cells, but you are outnumbered. Living on your skin, in your gut, in your nasal passages, are over 1,000 trillion bacterial cells. Your body hosts thousands of distinct species of viruses, most of them dormant, many of them integrated into your very DNA. You carry a personal cloud of microbes with you everywhere you go, a miasma of shed skin cells, respiratory droplets and bacteria that extends several feet from your body. For humans, this is normal. It is the background noise of biology. We evolved in this soup. Our immune systems are not static walls. They are dynamic, intelligent armies in a state of perpetual low-level conflict. We don't just resist disease, we negotiate with it, manage it, and carry it with us. A human child, by the age of 5, has been exposed to and fought off more unique pathogens than the entire Thalaxian concord had encountered in the last 5 centuries. The Thalaxians, in their sterile perfection, had forgotten what a true pathogen even looked like. Their immune systems were like museum guards protecting an empty vault. The human immune system was like a battle-scarred general, with memories of a million wars etched into its very cells. And on the Pandora one member of the crew, Dr. Eli Vance, the chief xenobiologist, was losing one of those tiny, perpetual wars. He had a cold. A simple, common human rhinovirus. He picked it up from a datapad shared with a colleague 3 days prior. He was in the early, peak contagious phase, sneezing, watery eyes, a runny nose, an annoyance, a trivial human inconvenience. He was tucked in the corner of the life support hub, trying to stifle his sneezes into his sleeve, embarrassed and miserable. He was patient 0 for an extinction-level event he didn't know he was carrying. Admiral Kale watched from the bridge of his flagship, the Imperator Asterisk, as the boarding claw designated hand of Talon magnetically sealed itself to the Pandora's dorsal airlock. The feed from the warrior's helmet cams was crystal clear. He saw the nervous, pale faces of the humans through the viewport. He saw their harmless tools. He permitted himself a thin, lipless smile of satisfaction. This would be over in minutes. The airlock cycled. The atmospheric equalization warning flashed. The leader of the hand, veteran Carax, signaled his team. In flawless unison, they disengaged the secondary safety seals on their armor. This was protocol. A Thalaxian warrior in full battle seal was impervious, but also slow. For a routine pacification of a non-threat, they would open their secondary environmental exchanges to increase mobility and sensory input. It allowed a slight, filtered exchange with the external atmosphere. The filters were rated for known galactic toxins and bioagents. They were not rated for human common cold virus, strain RV14. The inner airlock door of the Pandora slid open with a hiss. Carax stepped through first, his plasma cutter held low and non-threatening. The air inside was warm, humid, and rich with organic compounds his sensors had no reference for. Pollen analogues, dander from a species called dog that was listed as a companion animal, traces of complex proteins from something called peanut butter. And floating in that rich, biological haze were millions of virus particles, expelled minutes earlier by a stifled, half-successful sneeze from Dr. Vance. The particles were tiny, 0.02 microns in diameter, small enough to slip through the filters designed for larger, known threats, small enough to be inhaled directly into the pristine, defenseless alveolar sacs of a Thalaxian lung. Carax took his second step into the corridor. He felt a strange, faint tickle in his upper respiratory tract, a novel sensation. His onboard biomonitor registered an unknown particulate. It categorized it as inert organic dust. No threat. Behind him, the other 4 warriors of the hand fanned out. They all breathed the same air. On Kale's viewport, the telemetry from his warriors was a stream of green identifiers, all systems optimal, all warriors' vital signs stable. Then Carax's vitals flickered, a minuscule spike in basal metabolic rate, a slight increase in nasal mucosa production. Kale leaned forward, his large black eyes narrowing. A systems glitch. Carax, inside the corridor, blinked, his vision blurred for a millisecond. A headache, sudden and piercing, lanced behind his eyes. He tried to report. All that came out over the comms was a wet, gurgling cough. The cough was not a sound of aggression. It was a sound of systemic failure. Inside Carax's body, a silent invasion was achieving in seconds what Thalaxian science had spent millennia preventing. The human rhinovirus, a simple 20-nanometer sphere of RNA wrapped in a protein coat, had found a universe of opportunity. A Thalaxian cell had never seen a viral attachment protein like this. It had no memory, no antibody, no pre-programmed defense. The virus docked, injected its genetic material, and hijacked the cellular machinery with terrifying efficiency. What would have been a minor skirmish in a human body, quickly contained by interferons and T-cells, was, in the sterile biological landscape of a Thalaxian, an uncontested blitzkrieg. On Admiral Kale's monitor, Carax's biosigns cascaded from green to amber, heart rate spiking, core temperature rising sharply, a fever, a concept so alien to Thalaxian physiology that the monitoring AI initially flagged it as a life support system malfunction. Then the other warriors began to cough, a wet, ragged chorus over the comms. Warrior 2, Vex, dropped to one knee, his plasma cutter clattering to the deck. He was hyperventilating, his body misinterpreting the viral invasion as a catastrophic oxygen deprivation event. His vision swam with phantom lights. The human crew, watching from behind their safety glass, were paralyzed with a new kind of terror. They weren't being attacked. They were witnessing a mass drowning on dry land. Captain Thorne's training kicked in. Med Bay, full quarantine on that corridor, seal it now. But the ship's AI responded with a calm, logical contradiction. Atmospheric sensors detect no known neurotoxins, biocides, or radiation. Threat assessment unclear. The Thalaxian armor was still reporting all systems nominal, even as the warriors inside were dying. The virus was bypassing every layer of technological defense because it wasn't recognized as a weapon. It was just biology. And biology, to the Concord, was a solved equation, until it wasn't. Back on the Imperator Asterisk, Admiral Kale was issuing frantic, contradictory commands. Hand of Talon, report, what is your status? Identify the contaminant. All he heard was wheezing. Then a new sound, a harsh, tearing sound from Warrior 3, Krill. He was vomiting a clear, viscous fluid. His body, attempting to purge an invader from a non-existent playbook, was triggering every emergency flush protocol at once. Kale watched, frozen, as Krill's helmet cam showed the interior of his own visor fogging, then streaking with fluid. The warrior's final transmission was a choked whisper. The air, it burns. Within 90 seconds of entering the corridor, the entire Hand of Talon was incapacitated, not by force, but by fever and pulmonary edema. Their superhuman immune systems, devoid of any context for this fight, had gone into a catastrophic, self-destructive overdrive. It's called a cytokine storm, a desperate, total immune response that attacks everything, including the host's own tissues. In humans, it's a rare and severe complication. In a Thalaxian, whose immune system had never learned restraint, it was the default setting. Their bodies were quite literally committing suicide in a panicked attempt to kill an enemy they couldn't comprehend. Dr. Eli Vance, the source of the sneeze, pressed his hands against the observation glass, his own mild cold symptoms forgotten. My God, he whispered, they have no acquired immunity. They're immunologically naive. We're looking at a virgin field epidemic. The xenobiologist in him was racing ahead of the horror. A virgin field epidemic occurs when a pathogen encounters a population with zero prior exposure or resistance. The historical examples are etched in human tragedy: smallpox in the Americas, measles in Polynesia. Mortality rates could hit 90% or higher. And here it was, happening in fast forward, in an airlock corridor, to the galaxy's most formidable soldiers. Admiral Kale made a decision born of sheer tactical disbelief. He ordered a second hand, the Hand of Valor, to board and retrieve their fallen comrades. It was the logical Concord response. A technical failure required a technical solution. Better armor seals, higher filter settings, they would treat this as an extreme environmental hazard. The second claw docked. The warriors, now briefed on the anomalous readings, entered in full, triple-sealed battle configuration. No secondary exchanges open. They moved with swift precision, grabbing the convulsing bodies of their brothers. But the virus was no longer just in the air. It was on the armor of the first hand. It was in the viscous fluids on the floor. It was a surface contaminant. As Warrior Valor 4 dragged Carax's limp form back toward the airlock, a minute breach occurred. A seal, stressed by the dead weight, flexed for a millisecond. Aerosolized particles, stirred up by the movement, found the gap. It was all the opening the virus needed. The contagion had jumped containment. By the time the second hand returned to their claw and detached from the asterisk Pandora asterisk, 2 of its 5 members were already feeling the telltale tickle in their throats. They had brought the plague back with them. Aboard the asterisk Imperator asterisk, panic was now a tangible force. The medical bay, a place that had never treated anything more serious than a radiation burn or a training injury, was overwhelmed. The 5 warriors of the first hand were dead within 10 minutes of being brought aboard. Their autopsies revealed a biological atrocity, lung tissue resembling soaked, shredded paper, organs swollen with hemorrhagic fluid, systemic collapse. The ship's chief physician, a venerable Thalaxian named Solon, stared at the scanner results in utter incomprehension. This is not a toxin, this is replicative. It's a pathogen, but that's impossible. The word impossible shattered against the evidence, and then the warriors from the second hand began to fall ill. The virus was now loose on the Imperator Asterisk, a capital ship with a crew of 2,000. Admiral Kale faced a nightmare scenario. His ship, the pride of the Third Fleet, was compromised. The protocol for an unknown shipborne biohazard was drastic: immediate full quarantine, followed by sterilization pulses that would kill every unshielded organic thing aboard. But could he give that order? Could he euthanize his own crew on a suspicion? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, the virus replicated. He opened a channel to High Command, a secure, entangled link that bypassed normal comms. His report was a masterpiece of understated dread. Imperator actual to Concord High Command. Boarding operation of unknown human vessel has resulted in catastrophic rapid-onset biological casualty event. Causative agent unknown. Contagion vector, airborne particulate. Agent is transmissible between Thalaxians. Repeat, agent is transmissible between Thalaxians. We have containment failure, requesting immediate policy guidance and biological warfare response team. The silence from the other end was longer than regulations allowed. The implications were universe-altering. A disease that could jump between Thalaxians hadn't existed for 1,000 years. They had no protocol for it. They had no cure for it. They had, essentially, no defense. On the Asterisk Pandora Asterisk, the human crew was piecing together the same horrifying picture. Dr. Vance, isolated in a makeshift lab with a tissue sample he'd guiltily collected from a swipe of the corridor floor, was running analyses. The results confirmed his worst fear. "It's RV-14, he said, his voice hollow. "A common cold virus, benign in humans, but their genetic markers, Captain, their immune architecture is completely different. They lack the variable receptor sites our immune systems use to recognize and remember threats. It's like their bodies are written in a different coding language. Our virus just compiled, and it's fatal." Captain Thorne understood the strategic and moral abyss that now opened before them. They had just, entirely by accident, demonstrated a perfect, untraceable, apocalyptic biological weapon, and the galaxy's most militaristic power had just experienced its effects firsthand. What would the Concord do next? Would they glass the Asterisk Pandora from orbit to contain the outbreak? Would they reverse engineer the virus and turn it against humanity? Or would they, in their terror, decide that humanity itself was the virus that needed to be eradicated? Admiral Kale, watching the infection spread through his crew decks with the cold, swift logic of a gas leak, arrived at his own grim conclusion. The Asterisk Pandora was not a ship. It was a bioweapon platform. Its crew were not scientists. They were delivery mechanisms. Every breath they took was an act of war. The logical Thalaxian response to a bioweapon attack was codified in the doctrine of cleansing fire, total annihilation of the source. He powered up the Asterisk Imperator's Asterisk primary weapon banks. The targeting matrix locked onto the small, helpless science vessel. His claw hovered over the firing control. But then, a new data stream flashed on his screen. It was from the ship's external sensors. They were detecting leakage. The leakage wasn't from the Pandora. It was from the Imperator. The virus, having burned through its first hosts, was finding new exits. The ship's external waste venting system, a routine process that expelled filtered biological byproducts, was registering anomalous particulate counts. The filters, designed for Thalaxian biomatter, were not designed to capture an alien virus they couldn't even detect. With every cough from a dying crewman in the medical bay, with every exhalation, a plume of infectious particles was being subtly vented into the void around the Thalaxian capital ship. It was creating an invisible, expanding cloud of contagion. Admiral Kale's targeting solution on the Pandora wavered. Destroying the source would not cleanse his own ship. It would be an act of futile vengeance, not a tactical solution. He was no longer facing a single enemy vessel. He was facing an environmental hazard that his own ship was now actively spreading. On the Pandora, Dr. Vance's console lit up with a new alert. The ship's external sensors, tuned to detect microscopic debris, were picking up a diffuse particle field emanating from the Imperator. "Captain," he said, his voice tight, "they're venting atmosphere, and it's hot, biologically hot. The virus is aerosolizing and leaving their ship. If any other vessel comes near, or if a shuttle passes through that cloud," he didn't need to finish. The pandemic had breached primary containment. It was no longer a shipboard outbreak. It was now a potential sector-wide event. High Command's response to Cale's desperate report was a study in glacial bureaucratic panic. The doctrine of cleansing fire was clear, but its application to flagship of the Third Fleet was unthinkable. Instead, they dispatched the Vexillon, a dedicated biohazard cruiser, with orders to establish a cordon and attempt a decontamination. But the Vexillon was 6 hours away at maximum warp. 6 hours in which the virus aboard the Imperator replicated exponentially. 6 hours in which the vented cloud grew denser. And 6 hours in which the terrified, feverish crew of the Imperator began to make mistakes. Here is where the biology of the virus met the psychology of a dying crew. A Thalaxian had never experienced illness. They had no concept of quarantine, of bed rest, of isolating the sick. The social protocols for a plague did not exist. A crewman from engineering, feeling the first flush of fever, reported to his supervisor. The supervisor, also feeling unwell but dismissing it as stress, authorized a transfer of a data core to the secondary command deck. That data core, handled by feverish hands, became a fomite, a surface vector. The virus, stable for hours on polished metal, hitched a ride. By the time the Vexillon arrived, flashing its sterile white hull into the sector, 30% of the Imperator's crew was symptomatic, and the infection had reached the bridge. Admiral Cale felt the headache himself, a piercing, alien pain behind his eyes. He dismissed it as fatigue, but when his second-in-command, Commander Valen, suddenly slumped over her navigation console, bleeding from the nose, the reality became personal, inescapable. Cale's own body, the pinnacle of Thalaxian genetic engineering, had been defeated by a particle too small to see. The humiliation was total, but it was about to be surpassed by horror. The Vexillon hailed the Imperator. "Imperator, this is Biocommandant Sorax aboard the Vexillon. We are initiating full remote scan. Prepare for decontamination protocols." Their scans painted a picture of sheer hell. Life signs were dropping in clusters. The internal atmospheric analysis showed a stunning concentration of foreign viral RNA. Sorax, a being who had dedicated his life to the theoretical study of eradicated diseases, saw his life's work rendered obsolete in a single data packet. "Admiral Cale," Sorax said, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance, "your ship is the source of an unknown, replicating Class A pathogen. You are ordered to cease all venting, power down non-essential systems, and await boarding by our contained medical teams." But Cale was fighting his own war now. The bridge lights were too bright. His thoughts were slowing, thickening like syrup. The part of his mind still capable of strategy understood the implication of Sorax's orders. Boarding by medical teams. Those teams would enter, would be exposed, and would return to the Vexillon. The cordon would fail. The entire Thalaxian biosecurity paradigm, based on the absolute sterility of their response vessels, would shatter. He made a last, monumental decision. Not as an admiral, but as a carrier. He activated the ship-wide comm, his voice a ragged growl. "This is Admiral Cale, all hands, initiate, protocol final silence, authorization Cale 79er Omega." On the Pandora, they heard the transmission. Captain Thorne looked at his communications officer. "Final silence? What is that?" They had no entry in their limited Concord database, but on the Vexillon, Biocommandant Sorax knew. His slender body went rigid. "No, he cannot, he must not." Final silence was a protocol from the ancient, pre-sterility Thalaxian wars. It was used when a ship was taken by an incurable plague to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. It was not a quarantine. It was a self-destruct sequence with a biological twist. Deep within the Imperator's core, systems engaged. Not the warp core, but the ship's organic recycling plants and atmospheric processes. They began to reverse their function. Instead of scrubbing and cleaning the air, they started to pull every particulate, every aerosol, every trace of the ship's internal atmosphere and super-concentrate it. They were not trying to purge the virus. They were trying to harvest it, to concentrate every infectious particle into a single, dense, weaponized slurry. The final, spiteful act of a dying crew to turn their own bodies into the payload of a biological missile. Dr. Vance, monitoring the Imperator's wild energy signatures, pieced it together first. They're not trying to clean the ship. They're trying to bottle the infection. They're creating a bomb, a plague bomb. The sheer, terrifying logic of it froze the Pandora's bridge. The Thalaxians, faced with a weapon they couldn't defeat, had decided to replicate it, to formalize it, to take the accidental human bioweapon and refine it into something intentional. The Vexillans saw the same data. Sorax immediately countermanded Kale's order, but the Admiral had locked the protocol with his command code. It was irreversible. Sorax now faced an impossible choice. Let the Imperator complete its transformation into a drifting, billion-ton bioweapon, or destroy it before the concentration process was complete, potentially scattering partially concentrated virus across the sector. His decision was swift. The Vexillans' weapon ports opened. They targeted the Imperator's main engines, aiming to cripple it, to buy time for a more precise strike on the concentration chambers. But as the Vexillan powered its weapons, a new alarm sounded, not on the Thalaxian ships, but on the Pandora. Their long-range scan picked up a new signature entering the sector, not Thalaxian, not human. It was a Jixian trade caravan, a flotilla of 3 bulky merchant vessels moving along a standard shipping lane, oblivious to the silent catastrophe unfolding just off their path. And their course would take them directly through the expanding, vented particle cloud surrounding the Imperator. Scale of the disaster was about to multiply. The virus, which had jumped from human to Thalaxian, was now poised to jump to a third, completely unrelated species. The Jixians were not genetically fortified like the Thalaxians. They were a species of modest biology, with a normal, vulnerable immune system. What would a human common cold virus do to a Jixian? No one knew. It was another virgin field, another potential extinction-level event, and it was minutes away from happening. Captain Thorne realized they were no longer just witnesses or accidental perpetrators. They were the only ones who understood the full scope of the threat. They had the medical data on the virus. They had the only immune systems that could withstand it. And they had a ship sitting between a dying battleship crafting a plague bomb, a panicked biocruiser ready to fire, and 3 innocent civilian vessels sailing into a biological minefield. Every protocol, every rule of non-interference shattered in that moment. He turned to his crew, his face set in grim resolve. Open a channel, all frequencies. I don't care if they understand. We're broadcasting a warning, and then we're going to try something very, very stupid. Captain Thorne's warning burst across every frequency, a raw scream of data into the void. It was met with static from the Jixians and with furious, scrambled encryption from the Thalaxians. The Pandora was now the loudest and most vulnerable target in the sector. On the bridge of the Vexillan, Biocommandant Sorax saw the human transmission as an act of psychological warfare. They are broadcasting their victory. They seek to panic the primitives. He nearly gave the order to fire on the Pandora first, but then his science officer, analyzing the screaming data packet, went very still. Commandant, the transmission, it is not a boast. It is a medical file, genomic sequence of the pathogen, symptom progression, proposed treatment protocols. Sorax snatched the data. What he saw dismantled his understanding of the event. The humans were not gloating. They were trying to help. They were sending a blueprint of the weapon alongside instructions for its neutralization. The treatment protocols were bizarre, nonsensical to Thalaxian medicine, references to supportive care, fever management, hydration, concepts from a medieval medical text. But buried in the data was one crystalline, shocking fact. For humans, this pathogen had a mortality rate of approximately 0.01%. It was a triviality, a seasonal nuisance. The Thalaxian apocalypse was, to its creators, the common cold. This changed everything. An intentional bioweapon is deployed to kill. An accident is managed to save lives. Sorax, for the first time, considered the unthinkable. This was not an attack. It was a catastrophic misunderstanding. He countermanded his weapons officer. Hold fire on the human vessel. Redirect all power to translating their data packet. I want to understand these treatment protocols. Meanwhile, the Jixian lead freighter, the Bountiful Harvest, finally responded. The captain's face, a whiskered, four-eyed visage, filled the Pandora's screen, etched with confusion. Human vessel, we receive your energetic broadcast. You speak of a biological hazard. We see only Thalaxian military vessels. Have we violated a restricted zone? Captain Thorne didn't have time for diplomacy. Change your vector now. Immediate hard turn to bearing 270 by -40. You are sailing into an invisible cloud that will kill every one of you within hours. We are transmitting the hazard zone map. The Jixian captain, skeptical but prudent, ordered a minor course correction. It wasn't enough. The leading edge of the vented particle cloud from the Imperator was too wide. The asterisk bountiful harvest asterisk S hull passed through it. For a tense minute, nothing happened. Then the ship's internal environmental sensors detected a novel particulate. The Jixians had decent biofilters. They scrubbed 80% of the virus, but 20% made it through. On board the freighter, a Jixian loader in the cargo bay, his respiratory system less robust than most, inhaled a cluster of virions. Back on the Imperator, Admiral Kale was losing consciousness. The final silence protocol was 70% complete. The concentration chambers were filling with a deadly slurry, but the human broadcast had reached his failing ship as well. His strategic mind, drowning in fever, latched onto one fragment of the data: mortality rate, 0.01%. Incubation period, 1-3 days. Duration, 7-10 days. The numbers swam before him, 7 to 10 days. Not instantaneous death, a period of debilitation. His protocol was designed for a fast-acting, 100% lethal agent. This was different. With a Herculean effort of will, he slammed his clawed hand onto the command console, inputting an abort code. The system rejected it. Protocol final silence, once initiated, could not be stopped, but it could be redirected. He rerouted the concentration output. Instead of piping the slurry to a central warhead, he diverted it to the ship's primary waste ejection port, the same port that was already venting to space. He ordered the port opened fully, and the concentrated slurry was jettisoned as a solid, frozen block into the void. 1 million doses of pure virus, flash-frozen and hurled away from the inhabited sector, on a trajectory that would send it hurtling into the system's star in 3 days' time. It was not a perfect solution. It was an act of desperate containment. Then, Admiral Kale collapsed. The Vexilon, monitoring the Imperator's power fluctuations, saw the abort maneuver and the ejection. Sorax understood. The plague bomb had been defused. The immediate intentional threat was gone. His focus snapped back to the Jixians. Had they been contaminated? His scans were inconclusive. Then the bountiful harvest sent a frantic, confused hail. Thalaxian command vessel, this is Jixian Freighter Alpha. One of our crew has developed a most peculiar ailment. Sneezing. Nasal discharge, low-grade temperature elevation. It is unlike anything in our records. We request medical guidance. It had happened, cross-species transmission to a third party. The galaxy's first multi-species pandemic had begun, but something unexpected occurred. Dr. Vance, monitoring the Jixians' medical telemetry, which they openly broadcast in their panic, saw the infection take hold. And then it plateaued. The Jixian immune system, while naive, was adaptable. It wasn't triggering the catastrophic cytokine storm seen in the Thalaxians. Instead, it was mounting a robust, but measured defense. The patient was uncomfortable, miserable, even, but not dying. The virus, having jumped from human to Thalaxian, had possibly attenuated slightly or found the Jixian biology a less explosive host. The Jixians were sick. They were not being exterminated. This was the critical pivot. The horror was real, but the absolute sterilizing fear began to recede. Sorax, now working with the translated human data, ordered the Vexilon to deploy its medical shuttles, not in full battle containment, but with modified protocols based on the human suggestions: isolation, air filtration, symptomatic treatment. They boarded the Imperator not as a cleanup crew, but as a relief force. They found a ship of the dead and the dying, but also survivors, Thalaxians with stronger constitutions who were, against all odds, fighting the virus to a stalemate. The human data suggested most would recover, though their immune systems would be forever scarred by the experience. A tense, silent week passed. The Pandora remained under the watchful guns of the Vexilon, but no shot was fired. Communication, once a stream of threats, became a trickle of medical data, then logistical coordination. The Jixian freighter, its crew recovering from what they now called the human sniffles, was allowed to proceed, after promising a period of quarantine at their next port. The Thalaxian High Command, once baying for retribution, fell into a stunned, strategic silence. They had encountered a force that bypassed all their technology, all their genetic mastery, and that force had not come from a weapon, but from a sneeze. The implications for galactic power dynamics were earth-shattering. Humanity was not a peer military competitor. They were a walking biological hazard, a death-world species whose very presence was a potential act of unintentional war. The final surprising detail emerged from the autopsy data, shared in a moment of grim scientific collaboration. The virus hadn't just killed the Thalaxians. In a few of the earliest victims, it had done something else. It had spliced fragments of its RNA into the host's dormant genomic archives, sections of DNA that were evolutionary leftovers from Thalaxia's own disease-ridden past. It was as if the virus had activated ancient, buried immune pathways. The Thalaxians who survived would not just have antibodies to the human common cold. Their children, through a process of viral-driven epigenetics, might inherit a slightly more robust, more adaptable immune system. The plague, in its terrible wake, had accidentally given the sterile Thalaxians something they had engineered away a millennium ago, the evolutionary gift of immune memory. The horror was also, paradoxically, a vaccination. The stand-down was formal and cold. The Vexilon would tow the crippled, plague-scarred Imperator back to Thalaxian space for decommissioning. The Pandora was released, with a stark warning. Human vessels were to install and announce a new classification of beacon, a biosafety level Omega beacon, warning all other species of the potentially catastrophic biological cargo within. Humanity was not outlawed. It was quarantined by reputation. We became the galaxy's lepers, its designated carriers. Our greatest asset in a sterile universe was no longer our curiosity or our intellect. It was our magnificent, terrifying microbial ecosystem. As the Pandora warped away from the silent graveyard of the sector, Captain Thorne looked at his crew. They had saved lives, they had prevented a galactic pandemic, and they had irrevocably doomed their species to isolation. Dr. Vance, finally over his cold, stared at his hands. "One sneeze," he murmured. The phrase hung in the recycled air of the bridge, a monument to absurd, astronomical consequence. The story would leak, of course. It would become a legend, a warning, a joke. But for the Thalaxian admiral who watched his warriors fall, and for every species that heard the tale, the message was clear: beware the humans, not for their weapons, but for their breath. Their story was over, but the galaxy's new fear was just beginning. In the grand archives of the Galactic Republic, the Pandora incident is filed under two contradictory categories: first contact protocols and biological warfare. For humanity, it is the moment we learned our most profound truth. We are not the heroes of the galaxy, nor are we its conquerors. We are its background radiation, a persistent, low-level threat that must be managed, contained, and approached with extreme caution. Our ships now travel under the shadow of the biosafety level Omega beacon, a symbol that marks us as the universe's pariahs and its most unwittingly dangerous species. Thalaxian Concord never publicly admitted the full scope of their losses. The official record states the Imperator suffered a catastrophic reactor failure, but in the halls of their high command, a new doctrine was quietly drafted, the doctrine of biological deterrence. They began a crash research program, not to create bioweapons, but to desperately try to understand and simulate the chaotic, microbial ecosystem of a death world. They needed to build an immune system that could survive us. Admiral Kale survived, though his health was permanently broken. He became an advocate for a new, terrifying idea, that humanity should be studied not as a peer, but as a force of nature, a sentient plague that could, if properly understood, teach them how to be strong again. For the rest of the galaxy, the lesson was simpler and more visceral. A new folktale spread, a warning to curious younglings: beware the soft skins from the poison world. Their greetings are sniffles, their handshakes are contagions, and their kindness can sterilize a planet. We became monsters in their nursery rhymes, yet this isolation forged an unexpected path. Denied easy integration, human science turned inward, focusing on mastering our own chaotic biology with a fervor we never possessed before. We became the galaxy's undisputed experts in immunology, virology, and pandemic response, not to wage war, but because we were the only ones who lived every day inside the war zone. The lingering question from that single sneeze isn't about blame or weaponry, it's about context. In a sterile universe, a microbe is a shock troop. In our world, it's a neighbor. The Pandora incident proved that the greatest threat in the cosmos may not be malice, but simple, profound biological mismatch. A flower from one world is a toxin on another. A human child's sniffle is an alien extinction event. Our story is the ultimate cautionary tale of first contact. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can share isn't your technology or your ideology. It's your air. So the next time you feel a tickle in your throat, a slight fever, the mundane annoyance of a seasonal cold, remember the Thalaxian admiral frozen at his viewport. Remember that within you right now courses the legacy of a death world, an ecosystem of triumphs and truces written in RNA and antibodies. We are not weak because we get sick. We are alive because we learn to survive what would kill anything else. Our weakness is our strength, and our common cold is the most fearsome weapon we never meant to build. If you found yourself captivated by the terrifying logic of this accident, this collision of two impossible biologies, then you're in the right place. This channel is built on exploring the shocking, the sublime, and the strategically absurd. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we dissect next. Thanks for watching.